I want to dedicate a segment to discussing the increasingly real possibility of a Trump dictatorship, something I know some people hear and think sounds hyperbolic. If you feel that way, stick with me for this conversation. We have so much that I want to talk about in this segment. Lately, I've been seeing a surge in conversations about the potential of a Trump dictatorship if he wins in 2024. And so I want to weave a few different bits of reporting, interview moments, and thoughts into one segment and give you a feel of where the political discourse is on the subject as of now. To be clear, everything that is super frightening about this segment can be prevented if enough of us vote in 2024. So that's the takeaway. It's not just, doom and gloom. There's an important takeaway, and it's that we have to vote and encourage others to vote as well. But before getting into any of the new stuff I have to go over, let me once again, as quickly as I can, remind you of what we've gone through so many times. What do people mean when they say Trump is a wannabe dictator, an authoritarian, and would try to enact those ambitions if he became president again? Well, after Trump lost the 2020 election, he tried to stay in power. He didn't respect the results of a free and fair election. How did he do this? Well, 2 indictments lay this out. Our justice system is now trying to hold him accountable for this. He put together a slate of fraudulent electors and tried to get Mike Pence to recognize those as the actual lawful electors, justify Trump staying president. They tried to impede the lawful certification of the election. Trump's allies breached voting machines in Coffee County illegally. Trump pressured local officials to fraudulently overturn the results of their state's elections. And don't forget, Trump's own former lawyer, Jenna Ellis, said that Trump made it super clear to those around him after he lost that it was his intention to just stay in power, to hold on to power unconstitutionally, no matter what. Luckily, he failed. And then when he did fail, he was desperate. He provoked a mob to attack the Capitol to prevent the certification of Biden's victory. So in 2020 and 2021, Trump showed us with his actions, as at that time the sitting president of the United States, that he didn't respect the democratic process, and he thought that he should get to stay in power despite the will of the people. He went above the Constitution in his mind. Then went on to call for the termination of the Constitution. If you don't believe my articulation of his actions, then he actually said on True Social that the Constitution should be terminated, all rules, regulations, and articles of the Constitution, because of his lies about the election. So just loudly and proudly expressing his disgust for our Constitution. Then you move on to his plans for a second term. Some of this we'll touch on more as we go through reporting on this subject, but he plans to lock up his critics. He's been bragging about that publicly, and then invoke the Insurrection Act to crush demonstrations against him. Trump and his allies have a list of people, apparently, that they want to wrongfully prosecute because they are enemies of Trump. Plus, he intends on uprooting the rule of law to avoid his own legal accountability and punishing any of those who dared to try to hold him accountable. And I won't break down everything here for you, but there are also extensive plans, and it kind of connects to what I was just saying, to centralize and then weaponize the power of the executive branch for Trump's preferred ends. He's also been recently saying the government should, quote unquote, come down hard on media outlets he doesn't like, such as MSNBC. So also proudly against the freedom of the press. No respect for democracy or our Constitution, and dangerous authoritarian ambitions for a second term. With that context in mind, let's dive into some of this. The Atlantic has been doing really good reporting on this subject, the reality of a potential second Trump term. And here's a conversation on CNN with one of the writers at The Atlantic, breaking down the last thing I listed, Trump's plan to go after media outlets that he doesn't like.
He just declared that he would do everything he could against MSNBC the other day because he doesn't like their coverage because they're a progressive channel. What might that look like?
So he could use the Justice Department to try to, well, there are a number of mechanisms, right? He's talked about trying to bring the FCC into the White House and use that to decide which networks he can punish or shut down, revoke their license. MSNBC is not it's a cable network.
Right, so it's not governed by the FCC.
Right, but he could try to use the Justice Department to find innovative new ways to crack down on them legally. The question, the Attorney General is one thing. The question is, what about the rank and file lawyers at the Justice Department who, for example, have to file subpoenas or do the actual work to put these lawsuits together? Part of the work that's being done is that he wants to essentially politicize up to 50,000 federal workers with this plan that he has put in place through an executive order that would make it so that everyone at the Justice Department is on board with his agenda, and if they're not, they can be fired at will.
Absolutely chilling. Absolutely chilling.
Chilling is a good word for it, an understatement too. And to the last point that was made there, the Atlantic piece, What Trump's Second Term Could Look Like, outlines this. None of the officials inside a second Trump administration is likely to put a stop to any of this. In Trump's first term, several establishment Republicans thought they had a duty to serve and be a restraining influence inside the White House. Quote, "Don't expect it to happen again," McKay Coppens writes. This time, he would surround himself with bottom-of-the-barrel appointees who would care nothing for the Constitution and would only amplify rather than restrain Trump's narcissistic rage. Now, as an example of the types of loyalists Trump is expected to fill the government with, here is a man by the name of Mike Davis, who is considered, once you hear what he has to say, so frightening, considered top of the list to be Trump's attorney general if he wins in 2024. And this is what he has to say.
We've talked about this, Ben. I have 5 lists ready to go, and they're growing. List number 1, we're going to fire. We're going to fire a lot of people in the executive branch and the deep state. Number 2, we're going to indict. We're going to indict Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden and every other scumball, sleazeball Biden, except for the 5-year-old granddaughter who they refused to acknowledge for 5 years until the political pressure got to Joe Biden. Number 3, we're going to deport. We're going to deport a lot of people, 10 million people and growing, anchor babies, their parents, their grandparents. We're going to put kids in cages. It's going to be glorious. We're going to detain a lot of people in the DC Gulag and Gitmo. And list number 5, I'm going to recommend a lot of pardons. Every January 6th defendant is going to get a pardon, especially my hero, Horn Man. He is definitely at the top of the pardon list.
Kids in cages is going to be glorious, he says. Promising also to lock up Biden's entire family. For what? I guess we know the allegations they're bringing against Biden, but honestly, it's that Biden beat Trump in 2024. That's the big crime. And then the Bulwark had a piece titled, "There's a storm coming. We all know it. And yet Americans are pretending that everything is normal." And that's the purpose of segments like this. Everything's not normal. And I'll keep shouting that from the rooftops. One of the parts of this Bulwark article summarized the danger of Trump loyalists like Mike Davis, who you just saw there, being in these important positions of power with these bullet points. It starts acting appointees, or I should say acting appointments from top to bottom. Number 2, a cadre of thousands of political appointees vetted for personal loyalty to Trump, replacing career civil servants. Number 3, an understanding among Trump lieutenants that they are free to break the law because they will be pardoned. And number 4, an overriding desire on the part of Trump to seek retribution against perceived enemies. And just to continue giving you a sense of the now widespread discussion of this subject, there was also a piece from the Washington Post titled, "A Trump Dictatorship is Increasingly Inevitable. We Should Stop Pretending." Now that's obviously terrifying, and it goes through a lot of what we've been and are going through now in this segment, obliterating the rule of law, throwing out the Constitution. And it seems like even though Trump is broadcasting his ambition to do those things, he still has a shot of winning. All these millions of people are going to vote for him. Now, I do want to say on that, the title of that Washington Post piece bothered me. The message should not be, "This is inevitable, start accepting it." It needs to be, guys, this is possible. So we have to be as motivated as possible to prevent it from happening. No one can stay home when it comes time to vote. It's as important as it gets. That's the takeaway, as I said at the beginning of the segment. Also, by the way, something pretty freaky. Trump reposted a post on Truth Social by someone who had linked to the article that I just mentioned, a Trump dictatorship is increasingly inevitable. We should stop pretending. And the person that Trump reposted didn't say, oh, this is insane. They're saying Trump wants to be a dictator. That's not true. They just said all the great things in their mind that Trump had done, but didn't refute the idea that he would try to be a dictator. And Trump reposted that and also didn't say, oh, no, this article is crazy. He's being very clear about his intentions. And then you have former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who is super conservative, calling attention to this danger during a recent interview.
Our darkest terms, we will be voting on whether to preserve our republic in the next election. You think this is a vote about whether or not we still have democracy in this country?
It certainly is, and Donald Trump has told us exactly what he will do. He will not abide by the rulings of the courts. He will certainly appoint people to office, whether or not they can be confirmed by the Senate. He has talked about using the military in terms that really are fundamentally un-American, including here in the United States. So it's a very dangerous moment, and it's a moment for people to understand that cannot be the path that we go down as a country.
Just yesterday in an interview, you said fundamentally there's a choice to be made. You can't be both for Donald Trump and for the Constitution. You have to choose.
Yeah.
A vote for Donald Trump is unconstitutional, anti-American.
Well, he won't support and uphold the Constitution. We've already seen what happened. He is the only president in American history who attempted to overturn an election, who attempted to seize power, to stay in power after he had lost. And the reason that we didn't have a much more serious crisis was because there were people around him who stopped him, because there were people around the country, state officials, for example, who stopped him, who did not yield to the pressure that he put on them to change votes from Biden to Trump. We won't have that safeguard again. And he's so dangerous. If you have a president who is unwilling to abide by the rulings of the courts, who's unwilling to uphold the Constitution, then there are no guardrails who can stop him.
You've said we're sort of sleepwalking into dictatorship in the United States. Dictatorship. Is that what we would have if we reelect Donald Trump?
I think it's a very, very real threat and concern. And I don't say any of that lightly. And frankly, it's painful for me as someone who, has spent her whole life in Republican politics, who grew up as a Republican, to watch what's happening to my party and to watch the extent to which Donald Trump himself has, basically determined that the only thing that matters is him, his power, his success, and that is not somebody you can entrust with the power of the presidency.
It seems crazy to ask this and even crazier to fathom it, but do you believe if Donald Trump were elected next year that he would try to stay in office beyond a second term? That he would never leave office?
There's no question.
You think he would try to stay in power forever?
Absolutely. I mean, he's already done it once. And in fact, if you look at what he did in the run up to January 6th, in terms of his pressure on the vice president not to count legitimate electoral votes, his pressure on the Department of Justice, on state officials, and then refusing to send help when the Capitol was under attack, he's already attempted to seize power. And he was stopped, thankfully, and for the good of the nation and the republic. But he said he will do it again. He's expressed no remorse for what he did.
And good for Liz Cheney for calling attention to this. I'm happy, it's why I'm covering it today, that the mainstream media is starting to discuss what we've been discussing for some time. So hopefully that continues, because people can't be motivated to vote against the threat that Trump is if they don't know that he's a threat to our democracy and rule of law. But even though the mainstream media is adjusting their tone on this subject, because we can't be acting like it's normal. Oh, normal political coverage of this election. It's not normal, and it has to be treated that way. Even though there is a shift, it doesn't mean they aren't still failing in many ways. Take a look at this report from Media Matters pointing out a pretty stunning fact. Major news outlets devoted It writes, dramatically less coverage to former President Donald Trump describing his political enemies as vermin earlier this month than they provided then Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's 2016 basket of deplorables remark in the week following those respective comments. According to a Media Matters review, and this is sort of enraging, the big three broadcast TV networks provided 18 times more coverage of Clinton's 2016 deplorables comment than Trump's vermin remark on their combined nationally syndicated morning news, evening news, and Sunday morning political talk shows during the same span of time, the week after the comment was made. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC mentioned Clinton's deplorables comment nearly 9 times more than Trump's vermin comment. Print reports that mention Clinton's statement outnumber those that mention Trump's 29-1 across the 5 highest circulating U.S. newspapers. That's completely unacceptable. And that is the asymmetry of expectations, as friend of the show Josiah coined it, that we talk about. Because the media expects Democrats to be more respectful, they lose their mind when Hillary Clinton makes the deplorables comment. But when Trump calls the left vermin that need to be rooted out, directly mirroring the rhetoric of Hitler, it gets less coverage than deplorables. And I don't think the mainstream media does this purposely, is trying to help Trump, but it's just true that they grade Democrats on a tougher rubric. Often I think to come off as not too biased against Republicans because they're afraid of that allegation, but you just have to be accurate and you have to give the proper amount of focus to things that justify more focus. And I think we all, to an extent, allow extreme MAGA Republicans and Trump to be normalized. They're so in our face all the time, so naturally we're going to normalize that. And we have to do everything we can to prevent that from being the case. I don't want to hear another dang story about, concerns about Biden's age or his shoes. We're talking about the survival of a democracy. That should be almost the sole focus of political discussions about this election. Before we go, don't forget to become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership to get the daily bonus show Monday through Friday exclusively for our members. Plus, follow me on Threads at Luke Beasley Official, Instagram at Luke Beasley Official, X at Luke P. Beasley, and sign up for the Beasley Brief, a daily morning newsletter that summarizes the previous day's events by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/brief, and I'll talk to you all next time.